Hey there, I'm Alex, this is Big Al Books, and today I wanted to talk with you about the experience of reading Marcel Proust for the first time. So, in the past few weeks, I've been working my way through Swann's Way, which is the first volume in his iconic and gigantic, epic, long novel, In Search of Lost Time. And this was really one of the most profound and transformative reading experiences that I've had in a very long time. Since I am only at the start of my Proustian journey and I still have many thousands of pages ahead of me, I thought it wouldn't be that helpful for me to sit here and try to analyze this book in detail and to talk about its themes, since they're going to be developed so much further in this series. There's still, again, so many more volumes of this to get through. So I thought it would be more interesting for me to tell you about some of the major misconceptions that I had about Proust before I ever actually read Proust. So I had these just strange notions in my mind, kind of about why I wouldn't enjoy this series or why I couldn't enjoy it at this point of my life. So I wanted to share those misconceptions with you and to tell you why I was completely wrong about this series. I find it kind of funny that I ended up loving Proust so much because he was an author that I never intended to read as a younger person. You know, I'm in my later 20s, but I thought that this would be a project that could wait many years in the future. So I actually only ended up picking this one up because I'm doing this 20th century reading challenge, and I'm trying to read one book published in each year of the 20th century. And I had this book picked out for my 1913 read. This is Petersburg by André Billay. And then I started reading the introduction to this book, and I realized that this book did not finish publication in 1913 like I thought it had. So then I panicked because my complete list had to change. This was no longer my 1913 book, which left open this big gap. And I was looking at the books published in 1913, and there were very few of them that I was actually interested in reading. And one of the only ones that I had heard about and thought that I could try out was actually Swann's Way by Proust. So I thought that I would give this book a try. I've been discovering throughout the past few years that I tend to typically really enjoy French classics and French authors. There's just something about their style that I tend to gravitate towards. So I thought, Proust is like one of the most famous French authors. I should give him a try. This translation that I have is done by Lydia Davis, who I enjoy as an author and as a translator. So I thought this could be an accessible entry point, and I just picked up volume 1, really not planning on reading any more. I thought, I can just work through this volume. It's relatively short. Then I can put it down and pick Proust back up again many years in the future when I'm truly ready to read it. But joke's on me, because I ended up absolutely loving this thing. And even though I was really afraid of the commitment of reading this series, before I was even finished this first volume, I was online ordering the complete series because I knew I just had to work my way through this whole series. It is just too good. So, before we get into my first misconception, I just want to show you how dedicated I am towards making this Proust video today, because I actually went by Starbucks and picked up some Madeleines for us so that we could have some Madeleines and tea, because I feel like we have to talk about Proust in style. All we can hope and pray for is that I don't end up spilling tea on my couch. As you can see behind me, it's this light blue fabric, which looks beautiful, but is a total nightmare, especially when I get excited talking about books. I just get passionate and the arms start going and tea's gonna spill everywhere, but whatever, let's be optimistic. So, the first misconception that I had about Proust was I thought that he was going to be a boring writer. So I just thought that this reading experience might be a little bit on the dull side. And in order to unpack that, I thought I would share with you what my first ever introduction to Proust was. So my first impression was from the movie Little Miss Sunshine. I don't know if you remember that one. It was kind of this quirky family comedy sort of thing. And I feel like I have not seen that movie in at least 15 years. But I do remember that Steve Carell played this character who was really tragic. He was this very depressed scholar. I think he was out of a job. And it turns out that his character was a scholar who studied Proust. So I think in those films, when he was talking about his work, would have been the first time that I myself would have heard of Proust. And I think my impressions of what that author must have been like based on this character is that it seemed like it was an author who was very popular with academics and scholars, but who people in the normal world could not be bothered to care about. So it seems like the other members of the family really didn't share in any of his enthusiasm about his subject. I think I also picked up some pretentious vibes, thinking that maybe Proust was an author that could only be enjoyed by learned people, or like they liked throwing the name around to sound intelligent. And I guess I also thought that because that character of the uncle was just so clinically depressed in that film, I thought that Proust might also be a depressing kind of writer, since that character gravitated towards him so much. So that was kind of my first impression of him. Then, as I grew up and started hearing more about him as an author, it was more from people really celebrating In Search of Lost Time as being one of the greatest pieces of literature ever. So all you'd ever hear about this book is how it's just so timeless and it's so brilliant. And I knew that Proust was an incredible prose stylist and that he writes these really long, complex, gorgeous sentences. So in that sense, I knew that Proust would be an author that I would have to try at some point in my life, because I do really like checking out books that are considered to be brilliant and wonderful by many people for a long period of time. So I thought I'll have to try it one day, but like I said, I never thought that that day would be so soon. I thought I had my whole life to work up to that occasion. So going back to my first misconception, I thought that Proust was kind of going to be a bit of a boring writer. To be honest with you, I was a little bit worried in the beginning, because in the introduction, they wrote about how Proust had a pretty hard time finding a publisher for this work, and that a lot of publishers were rejecting him because of the opening material of the book, where it's like 40 pages describing a guy who's having a hard time falling asleep at night, which then goes on into an even longer memory of this narrator thinking about this particular evening from his childhood. And this kid used to be really obsessed with having his mom come and kiss him goodnight before going to sleep. And then when there'd be people over at their house for a dinner party, she wouldn't always come up. So it's about his like desperate schemes to get his mother to come up and kiss him, which is a weird subject to read about in that much detail with that much passion. So I was a little bit worried when I started this thing off. And then somewhere around the 100-page mark, there was just a total shift for me with the writing style. It just clicked for me all at once, and suddenly it all made sense, and I was no longer worried about finding anything in the narrative boring or dull or slow-paced. I was just so invested with what Proust was doing with his writing. It's probably around the famous iconic Madeleine scene, where the narrator has a tea-dipped Madeleine, and it just brings back these detailed recollections of his childhood. The other weird thing that started to happen to me around the 100-page mark was that I wasn't just starting to really mentally engage with the prose, but it was starting to give me physical sensations. And that's pretty unusual for me as a reader. You know, maybe when I listen to music, can I start to feel things in my body? But usually literature hits me on more of like this mental or emotional level, not usually physical. But I was like starting to get these weird like tremors in my arms, and there was just this energy and this feeling in my throat that I can't even describe. But like the prose was just so electric and so exciting that it was really making me feel these physical sensations. And I remember trying to read Proust before I was going to bed one night on a work night, and I couldn't fall asleep because I had this like feeling in my throat and I was so excited, and the prose was just so good that my mind was buzzing and I couldn't stop thinking about it. So really, from that point on, I knew that I was just gonna love this reading experience, and there was just nothing dull about it. I think it really depends on your personal taste to see if you're gonna connect with Proust on that level, but I think for people who get him, he just has this really exciting and gorgeous way of describing these kind of mundane, everyday moments that you might not notice, that you might take for granted in your everyday life, but he just makes everything just seem so beautiful and heartbreaking and wondrous. He really does make you feel enraptured with the wonderful sensory experiences that we get to experience in the world. I knew on one page that I was really in love with his style when he was describing asparagus, and he made them sound like the most beautiful creatures ever. So I thought, if this man can make vegetables that exciting, he's got something truly special. So even though, yeah, he does do these kind of lengthy descriptions, you might be reading about a certain scene from nature or a certain architectural structure or like a person for a couple pages. But if you love his style, it's not going to be boring, because the way that he writes about things is so insightful and enchanting that you just wish that it could go on forever. The other thing that I wasn't expecting is that Proust was actually pretty funny, and there were a few moments in here that did make me laugh out loud. And again, I thought because Proust was kind of this like academic figure, I thought he would be kind of dry and stuffy and boring, but again, he wasn't. The way that he writes about people and social situations is very funny and satirical, and I just laughed a lot while I was reading this book. So it was not only beautifully descriptive, but also pretty entertaining and engaging. My other misconception that I had about Proust was that this series is just way too long, and that no one needs to write this like 3,000 plus page novel where not really that much is happening. So that was something that I thought was going to be a real drawback for the series. But even though I can't attest to the series as a whole, because I'm not finished, what I can say from having read Swan's Way is that literally every page of Proust is gold. Like every sentence is brilliant. If you went through my copy of the book, I have underlined something on almost every page from this because there are just so many wonderful things happening all the time. So when you see each page as a treasure, as a gift to mankind, then it doesn't really feel like a chore to get through. So even though it is long, it's so precious, and I will probably end up wishing that it could have been longer once I get to the end of the series, which was something that I would never have expected to feel going into this series at the outset. For my third and final misconception, I thought that this series was going to be a bit too mature for me as a reader in my 20s. So what I mean by that was I just thought that since the series is called like In Search of Lost Time, I really thought it was about an older person that's kind of looking back on their life through the lens of their experience. And I just thought that I wouldn't connect with it as much as a 20-year-old because I'm someone who I feel like my life is mostly still ahead of me and I'm kind of forward thinking right now. So I don't know that I can connect as much with that idea of reflecting on things and going through my memory in that kind of minute detail. Also, I'm someone who has a pretty terrible memory. So I know that I could not ever accomplish a project like this. The way that he describes childhood, all of that stuff is gone to me. So it's nice to vicariously experience someone else's amazing memory. But I thought that this would be a series that I would appreciate more when I had a little bit more life behind me. I thought this would be a good series to read in my 40s or in my 50s when I could start to understand that process better. And while I still feel like that might be partially true, I think that I will only continue to gain appreciation with this series as I continue to age and have more of my own life experiences to reflect back on. I guess where I was wrong was I was thinking I couldn't be interested in the subject matter as someone in my 20s, which is totally incorrect. Because the way that he writes about life in such a vivid way that you feel like it's really happening and unfolding around you, that I think you can be any kind of age and appreciate it. This novel in particular focuses on the childhood experiences of our narrator, and that's something that I think that we can all connect with to this book. Some of the feelings and the sensations that he describes ring so true. So even though I wasn't growing up in France at this time, I still remember some of those feelings, like some of the moments of desperation that you feel as a kid, where you just need your feelings to be validated, or some of those feelings of enrapturement, especially the way that he describes the act of reading when you're a kid and getting lost in a story and having that really change you. So there are a lot of moments in here that I can connect with. As well, the second half of the book is about a man who gets involved in this very passionate love affair and how that kind of takes over his life and transforms him, which again, I think is still kind of like young subject matter. I think people in their 20s can definitely connect to that idea of passion and how love seems like it's this most important focus in your life and it's going to change everything, and then sometimes it doesn't. So at no point in this novel did I feel like my age was any kind of barrier for appreciating this. In fact, I feel right now at this stage of my life that I am very energized and passionate and kind of open-eyed about the world around me, which I feel like really connects with what this book is, because it's not mournful or pessimistic or anything like that. It is really being taken away with the beauty and the sensation that's around us as we try to grapple through it and search for meaning in our lives. So I think that that's something that people can connect with. However, I am kind of excited to see how my thoughts and opinions about this series might continue to change if I continue reading it throughout different periods of my life, which hopefully if I do enjoy the series as a whole, that will be something that I can continue to do, which I think is a sign of truly great literature, when it's something that is going to continue to evolve with you and your own life. So that's it for my reflections on Proust and some of the misconceptions that I had and why they were just completely wrong. So I guess the moral of the story here is to not base your opinions of literature based on weird indie comedies that you watched in your childhood or entirely from people sharing their opinions on the internet. You know, you really have to form your taste and your opinions yourself. And really the best idea is that if you're interested in something, you should just give it a try yourself, because I think you'll know fairly quickly whether it's something that's going to work for you or not. So overall, I'm very glad that I gave Proust a try for myself. It was just one of the most remarkable reading experiences of my life, and I really hope that the rest of the series will continue that feeling. So I guess I'd like to hear from you. If you are someone who has read Proust before, what do you think about him? Do you have any recommendations or tips for me as I continue making my way in this series? But I'd also like to hear from you if you also have some misconceptions, maybe about Proust, maybe about some other authors. What are some of the things that you think and you're not really sure why you think them? So that's it for me today. I'm now going to go off and finish the rest of my tea and Madeleine, which I miraculously did not manage to spill. Go me. So thanks so much for watching this video, and I will see you again some other time. Bye.